This week in the news, villainous entity Blizzard Entertainment twirls its mustache and cackles maniacally as it rescinds the 5 free stash tabs it promised to Diablo 3 players, ensuring the continued prosperity of its prolific salt mines.
Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the big Star Wars news of the week, the uncertain future of Dragon Age 4, a roundup of action RPG news, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the video description, but right before we jump ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub-notification bell to be alerted of new Saturday episodes. In our first story this week, we got a teaser, and it's really just a little teaser, for Jedi Fallen Order, the upcoming Star Wars game being developed by Respawn, who brought us Apex Legends. Now, I know there's been some trepidation about this game because it's being published under EA, but I believe Apex Legends has proved that Respawn could knock out a great game. And it was confirmed by a community manager that the game engine is not EA's Frostbite, which we often hear stories about EA forcing devs to use Frostbite, much to the dismay of the devs because it's an engine that's not great to work with, let's say. You hear a lot of stories of devs lamenting being forced to use Frostbite, but in this case, they used Unreal Engine 4. For instance, part of what went wrong with Anthem was the devs struggling with the Frostbite engine that made everything take longer. We also had a leak this week of this poster for the game. This was via an Amazon t-shirt listing of all things. But we won't have to wait too much longer for more details on Jedi Fallen Order because later today, there's going to be a live stream reveal of the game. In other Star Wars news, out of nowhere came the teaser trailer for Episode 9. Now, before I say anything else, spoilers ahead, be sure to have watched the teaser first or just skip this section entirely using the timestamps. I'm serious, last warning, pause the video if you have to, because I'll now give my first impression on Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So I'll start by saying that I am happy that we're likely going to see Luke as a Force ghost, or that he'll have some kind of presence in this movie. I'm happy that we see Lando. I'm happy that we see Leia. I'm happy that we see the ruins of the Death Star. And I'm very happy with the heavy implication that Emperor Palpatine will be playing some part in this narrative. But all that said, I just didn't come away from this trailer feeling hyped. What's wrong with me? I don't understand. It seems everyone's excited about this, and I remember feeling super hyped about the first reveal for this reboot trilogy, if you will, but I felt nothing throughout this entire trailer. Why is the joy gone from my heart? I don't know, maybe I'll get hyped when the full trailer comes out, but what do you folks think? Are you hyped about this? Are you excited? Has Star Wars just been ruined for you at this point and you're just too cynical to have any emotions about the trailers anymore? Sound off with your thoughts. In super quick Overwatch news, the new lore-based Archives PvE event has been revealed. Storm Rising will be coming April 16th and will run until May 6th. Alright, on to a big story this week, Dragon Age 4. Now, last week we spoke about how game journalist Jason Schreier put out that enormous article about Anthem. He interviewed a large number of current and former BioWare developers who worked on or close to Anthem. Now, he also spoke to a lot of these people about Dragon Age 4. And from the sounds of it, while Dragon Age 4 isn't guaranteed to be bad, there are some concerns. And it seems that the Dragon Age 4 that was cancelled could have been really fun. But let's start back in 2015 when the last DLC for Dragon Age Inquisition released. At that point, the Dragon Age team split up. Many moved on to Mass Effect Andromeda, while a few dozen developers began to spin up Dragon Age 4. This first version of Dragon Age 4, codenamed Joplin, was apparently very promising. One former BioWare dev called it, quote, some of the best work experiences he ever had. Quote, we were working towards something very cool, a hugely reactive game, smaller in scope than Dragon Age Inquisition, but much larger in player choice, followers, reactivity, and depth. I'm sad that game will never get made, said that dev. Basically, you'd play as a group of spies in the Tevinter Imperium, very high magic area in the world of Dragon Age. And the goal was to focus as much as possible on choice and consequence. A large chunk of the game would apparently revolve around heists. But then in late 2016, BioWare put Joplin on hold and moved the entire team to help out with Mass Effect Andromeda, which was in its final months of development and needed all the help that it could get. And if you're not familiar with the game, it released and was not considered very successful. There was a lot of problems, and it did not live up to the name Mass Effect, a prestigious game series. Now, Andromeda shipped in 2017, and at that point, work resumed on Dragon Age. But even at that point, some members of the Dragon Age team were starting to sense that Anthem was going to have a similar situation, and that they would probably have to be pulled onto that. Now, according to Jason Schreier's article, EA tends to give its studios a fair amount of autonomy, despite what lots of gamers want to claim. However, there are still mandates to follow. To quote Schreier, by 2017, EA had not been secret about its desire to make all of its major products into games as a service, best defined as games that can be played and monetized for months and years after their release. And the Dragon Age series had never been that kind of game, and it seems that development on Joplin at the time was not focused on pleasing EA in this way. Now, by the second half of 2017, it was clear that Anthem was in trouble. And in October of 2017, EA and BioWare together took drastic action and canceled Joplin and moved most of the staff onto Anthem to get that project finished. Only a tiny team stuck around to work on a new version, a rebooted version of Dragon Age 4, now codenamed Morrison. And this new version was being built on Anthem's tools and codebase. This is the Dragon Age 4 that is still being developed today. And unlike Joplin, this version is being planned with a live service component, quote, built for long-term gameplay and revenue. After the reboot, the creative director left, as did some veteran members of the Dragon Age team. Now, in early 2018, the general manager of BioWare came out and said, quote, I think you'll be relieved to see what the team is working on for Dragon Age 4. Story and character focused. Too early to talk details, but when we talk about live, it just means designing a game for continued storytelling after the main story. Now, Schreier cites a rumor that was circulating around the people that he interviewed that Dragon Age 4 would be Anthem with dragons, but a couple current BioWare employees told him that's not the case. To quote one, the idea was that Anthem would be the online game and that Dragon Age and Mass Effect, while they may experiment with online portions, that's not what defines them as franchises. I don't think you'll see us completely change those franchises. One person close to the game apparently told Schreier that the main story of Morrison will be designed for single player, and that the goal of the multiplayer elements would be to keep people engaged so that they would actually stick with post-launch content. So at the end of hearing all this, I have mixed feelings. I want to be hopeful for Dragon Age 4. I'm sad about the loss of the really cool game that it sounded like Dragon Age 4 would have been, but I hope that whatever they're making now will be just as good, and I truly hope that it will not suffer in order to retain some form of long-term monetization. Ultimately, only time will tell. Alright, on to some action RPG news, starting quickly with Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr. We got a video that released on the upcoming 2.0 update, which is going to massively overhaul and refine the combat system to make things a lot more fast-paced. Estimated time of release, May 28th. On to some last Epoch news. The trailer for the beta is live. The beta will drop on April 30th and will be available now on Steam. And in this beta, we're going to see the implementation of the game's first endgame system, the Monolith of Fate. In it, quote, players will run a sequence of zones with randomized enemies and objectives. At the end of each area, you'll be offered two options, each one adding new modifiers to the next several zones. These alternate timelines can be dangerous and unpredictable. Untold treasures await those who dare to explore its depths. This sounds like it could be a very cool system. It reminds me of stuff that Path of Exile does in a good way. For instance, Temple of Itsiri, some of the better synthesis elements. Regardless, I look forward to seeing the full details and trying this out myself. The beta is also adding 2.5 more chapters of story, which brings the total up to 5 chapters that have been revealed. 2 new mastery classes, the Paladin and the Druid, 12 new skills, 6 new skill trees, and UI updates. Onto some Grim Dawn news. Someone posted a thread on Reddit asking about the future of Grim Dawn, and Xantai, one of the game designers of Grim Dawn, actually replied. Now, the latest expansion to Grim Dawn just released recently, and if you haven't seen my video covering Grim Dawn, do check that out. But he expressed that the sales numbers are still coming in for that latest expansion, but, quote, we'll have to see if financially it will make sense to do a third expansion. He goes on to say that that may not necessarily be a bad thing. He personally believes that Forgotten Gods leaves Grim Dawn on a high note. Quote, at this point, I feel that another expansion might start to actually bloat an already great thing. Are there more stories we can tell in the Grim Dawn world? Absolutely. Some of them are best saved for a sequel, though, whenever that may be. He ends by saying, but don't worry, whether we do another expansion or not, you can still look forward to content and balance updates for Forgotten Gods. Now, the general tone that I get from this is that there probably will not be another expansion, but there probably will be a Grim Dawn 2. That's my interpretation. But sound off in the comment with yours, and what would you prefer, a Grim Dawn 2 or a third expansion? On to some Path of Exile news. Lead developer Chris Wilson gave an excellent talk at the 2019 Game Developers Conference, and they've kindly made that video available for free to the public. Link in the video description. In it, he sheds a lot of insight about the learning process, the iteration process, in getting into the right groove of development cycle with Path of Exile. He gives a lot of insight that shows that he really understands the genre and how to appeal to players of the genre. He talks about the 5 core design pillars for Path of Exile and for what he believes are necessary for a successful action RPG. Those 5 pillars being visceral action combat, randomly generated levels, randomly generated items, secure online economy, and deep character customization. It was interesting to hear him describe how in the early days they were experimenting with different forms of content updates. At first they were doing a small patch every week until they realized that that wasn't helping their numbers at all, which led to the idea of leagues, inspired by ladder resets in Diablo 2. They tried doing 1-month leagues at some point before eventually arriving at this 13-week cycle. And of course they would see that the bigger the content patch, the bigger the spike in players returning, but you have to find some balance. You can't have a huge content patch every time. And another really interesting thing is how they recognize what they have to target in their content patches in order to appeal to different types of players. So effectively, they always want to have some form of story content because that appeals to the players interested in the lore and the story. A unique gameplay mechanic, something like the synthesis memories that are collapsing on you as you run, so something that effectively changes the way you play the game itself. Then on top of that, some form of meta progression, sort of like the synthesis board, for instance, or the delve, whatever you call that interface, map, I guess. Another thing would be in-game aspirational content. Now we're talking about the end-game boss fights, the really difficult challenges that only a small fraction of the player base will ever achieve. In fact, he outlines specifically that only 10% of players actually reach this content. And he addresses the obvious question, well, why spend 20% of your development time appealing to only 10% of players? And he goes on to explain how, well, he feels that there's a lot of crossover between streamers and these 10% of players that make it to this content. And when you have streamers doing this content on stream, then other players who wouldn't otherwise have access to this content get to appreciate it, and it still manages to drive more interest in the game and be healthy for the game. Another thing that he mentioned was having league rewards, as well as new crafting options, and, of course, meta balance changes. Everything he said made lots of sense. There was never anything where it's like, well, I disagree, I don't think that's a good idea. He clearly has a really solid idea of how to run an action RPG, and I encourage you folks, if you're interested, to watch the video yourself. In other Path of Exile news, the devs posted about what they're currently working on. They're planning to announce their 3.7 expansion between the 17th and 24th of May, and they're able to confirm that there is a significant balance focus on melee and a league of simpler scope than the last few. This addresses a lot of recent concerns that the leagues are becoming too complex, particularly with synthesis. I find this kind of funny because it seems when the league is too basic, people complain that it's too basic. When it's too complex, they complain it's too complex. There's always going to be some fraction of people that are unhappy, but in fairness, we have had a few pretty heavy leagues, so having a lighter one, I think, is due. That also will afford devs more time to focus on other things. And the post also said that the current end date for synthesis is June 4th, and something that they're wondering about and want some feedback on is, should they let synthesis last right up until the start of the new league, or should they, as usual, have a few days between those two events? And I encourage you to sound off in the comments with your thoughts. Do you like to have a few days of break where you either stop playing the game or go back to standard league? Or does it irritate you to have this feeling of like, oh, well, there's nothing for me to do now for a few days. I just want to get into the next league. The devs also released a forum post explaining how we're approaching the melee rebalance in 3.7. They explained how in Synthesis they had an extensive rebalance of spellcasting, and that the 3.7 patch will basically do the same thing but for melee. One juicy quote here is, players from other action RPGs have occasionally criticized Path of Exile's melee combat for being clunky, especially early on before players get a lot of attack speed. Yep, me, I've done that. We are making various experimental changes to the animation system that should help resolve these concerns and really tighten up the feel of melee combat. I swear, over the years, any complaint, any issue, or criticism I've had of Path of Exile, the devs have just been slowly addressing them all. And I used to be able to point to, okay, here are the things that Diablo 3 does better, because I'm pretty sure this is what they're alluding to here, that I believe one of the greatest strengths of Diablo 3 is really that its fluidity of combat. The moment-to-moment action there is unmatched in any other aRPG, but it sounds like PoE is gunning for it. If you'd like full details on the melee revamp, link in the video description. Alright, on to Diablo news. So, the PTR for the upcoming Season 17 for Diablo 3 has allowed us to get a glimpse of the Ancient Vault. If you take an Ancient or Primal puzzle ring, they both do the same thing, pop it into a cube, it'll open instead of a regular vault, an Ancient Vault that's just loaded with goblins. Just goblin packs throughout the whole thing instead of monsters. The Legacy of Nightmares Captain America build is performing exceptionally well. Vir Chantoto Archon is performing very well. But there is one thing that has had players upset this week. Now, when they first put up the PTR patch notes, it sounded like they were giving everyone 5 additional stash tabs for free that you can just purchase with gold, i.e. for free. But then this week they've changed the post to say that that's just for PTR. On live servers, those 5 extra stash tabs will have to be earned the same way you currently earn stash tabs as seasonal rewards. In other words, yep, 5 extra stash tabs that you have to unlock 1 per season for the next 5 seasons. And as expected, people are understandably upset by this, or disappointed, because it felt like we were given something and then it was taken away. And had Blizzard just from the start stated that these would be 5 tabs that you can unlock, I think very few people would have been upset. But I want to finish off here with a really cool Diablo 2 story. Reddit user DBLCLN showed us some footage of a couple levels in Diablo 2 that no one has ever experienced before. You see, at some point in Diablo 2's development, there was an intention to bring guild halls as a feature, as well as PvP arenas. Neither ultimately made it through into the game, but there are relics of these systems left in the game files, and DBLCLN is someone who loved Diablo 2 and learned how to mod Diablo 2 with a particular interest in making new maps. Now, more recently, after doing a bunch of research and digging around within the game files, he managed to put together a playable version of the Guild Hall. Imagine Diablo 3's clan feature, except you can all congregate in an actual map. You see each other walking around in a little house, and there'd be something called the Steeg Stone, a form of treasury, and the more gold that players collectively put into the Steeg Stone, the more they would level up their guild hall. It would get physically bigger and unlock additional features, with some suggestion of there being trophy cases, and within the game files there's apparently 9 different guild hall presets. Now as for arenas, there were set to be 3 arenas in total, and our modder friend here managed to get 2 working. The PvP arenas would have been a more structured form of PvP, where there might even be best of 3, 5, or 7 in the duels. There would have maybe been some form of team fighting system where you first establish the teams before you load into the game. They even had a number of different game modes planned, including King of the Hill, Free-for-All, Capture the Flag, even a form of siege where you have an attacking and a defending team. Now, of course, these features never made it into the game, but it was really cool of DBLCLN to dig these up, get them functional, and record some video to share with us. I encourage you folks to check out the videos yourselves, leave him an encouraging kudos on his good work, because that is going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video, in which we discuss Jason Schreier's massive article on what went wrong with Anthem and why we should be concerned about BioWare. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and now YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider supporting on YouTube or Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.